And now, ladies and gentlemen,
Put your thumbs up and say it's tickety-boo.
Tickety-boo.
Tickety-boo, tickety-boo, everything's tickety-boo.
Tickety-boo, son. Tickety-boo.
Tickety-boo.
Welcome back to another episode of Tickety Boo. I'm here with Ian and Barney, and today we're going to be talking about vulnerability. I can hear some guys and girls already listening to it going, nah, that's not for me, I'm off. But why is it that when we talk about being vulnerable and wanting deeper connections, but as soon as it involves us having to tap into uncomfortable emotions, we're like, no, we're just going to shut that down? It's a strange one, isn't it, the whole vulnerability thing? We have the advantage of we grew up together and we can resonate. There would have been a point earlier in our lives where in our social circle we very probably wouldn't have shown any form of vulnerability.
Yeah, that's very true. But back then we would have automatically associated vulnerability with sort of weakness or exposing yourself, which it just didn't feel like a safe thing to do at the time.
Do you think that was because at that time, obviously, we were younger, it was that pack mentality of social acceptance, and you didn't want to be the weak, vulnerable one in the group that maybe the group would turn on?
Yeah, of course. It's a natural instinct, isn't it? I mean, it goes back to the time when we were living on the earth with, saber-toothed tigers and things with big tusks.
Yeah.
We had none of that, but what we did have was a pack.
Yeah.
And that's how we stayed safe. We looked out for each other, so we naturally want to be part of a pack. So we're almost scared to show our inner selves, being vulnerable, lay ourselves out there and our insecurities, because we crave acceptance and the safety of that pack.
Do you think when we were younger that we actually noticed that we were trying not to be vulnerable? I mean, did we even really know at that age what vulnerability was? Or, what I'm sort of trying to say is, did we consciously feel aware that we were masking stuff back in the day? When we're younger, do we notice that we're suppressing?
That's a good question. I'm not too sure. I think certainly when I was younger, I knew I was putting a face on. If I was scared, I wouldn't show it.
Yeah.
If I wasn't sure, I'd certainly wouldn't show it again. I'd sort of just come up with something which wasn't always the best. But
it's kind of what intrigues me is with the whole vulnerability thing. Is it we don't know at a certain age how to express what we're experiencing, or is it fear that stops us from expressing what we're going through?
Sorry, I'll get what you're saying a bit more now.
Yeah.
I think, going back to when you're really young, you walk round in your underpants, we're covered in chocolate.
Is that something you did, was it?
To be honest, I'll probably still do it now, to be honest. And you just wouldn't worry about going and peeing up the neighbour's hedge, or there was no vulnerability because you just didn't care.
Yeah.
But then as we get older, we sort of become more conditioned by everybody else's expectations, whether that's societal or the people close to us, our caregivers. But we're told that you should behave in a certain way, and we're actually conditioned to it. So I think vulnerability comes with when you feel you're not living up to.
Yeah. Did we think maybe vulnerability was you being soft? It's a soft thing.
When I was younger, I certainly thought that.
Yeah.
Certainly all the way through it's only now I'm older that I understand that we're all vulnerable in some way. And what I see vulnerability actually is it's you genuinely opening up to those, anything that hasn't got a set outcome. So vulnerability could be phoning an ill friend to see how they were, somebody you haven't spoken to a long time.
Yeah.
Putting your hand up and asking a question. Just reaching out, starting a business, starting a new job. That is all forms of vulnerability because it hasn't got a set outcome, and you're having to sort of lay yourself bare and take that chance.
So it sort of, I'm a great believer that your ability to express and show vulnerability ties into your family and social dynamics from your earlier stages in life. Like, I know for me, vulnerability, although I probably wouldn't have used that word when I was a child, speaking up or expressing, it was almost like painting a great big target on my back for attack or criticism or rejection or unwanted attention, whether that was from a caregiver or a parent or a friend, you know, something like that. So I kind of, where I'm really going for this is our ability to be vulnerable is kind of molded by the environment that we grew up in. So if you had a parent that, or parents or caregivers that didn't express emotion or didn't create an environment where it was safe for you to express emotion, then in order to stay safe, you're not going to express vulnerability, are you?
Exactly. In my mind, as you were speaking, that's right where I was going.
Right.
Now, if you lay yourself bare and you open up and you don't get the response that you were hoping for,
Yeah.
well, then naturally the armour goes back on, the masks go back on.
Yeah.
And any relationship that you have where vulnerability kind of isn't acceptable is only ever going to be at face level.
Yeah.
You're never going to have a deeper connection with anybody unless you can actually expose those vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
That could be, you know, when you think about it, it's absolute vulnerability when you say that you love somebody for the first time.
Yeah.
Or will you go on a date with me? Or it's that, this is why people find it so hard to just go and approach somebody in a pub, or
Yeah.
or if there's somebody that you really like, you can't approach, because it's that sense that they can't drop that vulnerability. They don't want to be vulnerable through this fear of rejection. Now, the actual word vulnerability, I will be corrected here, I'm sure. But basically, it's to lay yourself open to attack or harm. I've not got the words right there.
Yeah,
I've
that's
not
the
got
context.
that's the word. And that's how people say or feel about it, which really
Right.
isn't right. It's actually our doorway to deeper connections and better things happening.
Well, that's kind of, I think we make the mistake of using vulnerability to keep us safe, where really it keeps us alone and disconnected.
Yeah. Now, when you said to me, like, okay, let's do vulnerability this week, I was like, is there much to talk about there? And then I just sat down and realised this is a huge subject. It links into absolutely everything. Self-worth, toxic positivity, how you feel about yourself, how you express yourself. It's, you know...
But the stats are there as well, that people that genuinely struggle with vulnerability are much more likely to struggle with anxiety and depression, because they don't process emotion. They run from emotion, they bottle emotion up, and that, I always use the bottle of fizzy Coke. If you keep shaking it and the gas is building up inside, at some point, if you don't deal with your emotions end up dealing with you.
Yeah.
And they show up in different ways and formats in your life.
Yeah, no, I agree. I have got an example there,
Right.
which kind of, when I was a very small child, or sort of in my younger years. Now, I'm not criticising anybody. I had a wonderful, wonderful parents, but things were just different then. And a lot of the time, if I wanted to answer back, or I felt I had an argument to put across, I would try and say it. But in our house, what happened is, when you came back with a response, somebody else would just feel that they would need to shout louder than you to be heard. So the actual contents of the conversation, what I wanted to say, what I'd built up to say, was just never heard. It just felt like whoever shouted loudest was heard and won the argument. So then what happened was, I just stopped communicating. I became sort of conflict averse. So I started not communicating because I didn't want to be shouted at.
Because it was safer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a grown adult. I've been through all kinds of life experiences, but it resonated with me while we were talking earlier that I still don't want to be shouted at. So what happens is, I then don't communicate. I don't express myself through that.
So do you appease instead?
Yes.
Yeah.
I appease. But what happens is, as I appease and I roll over, then it just erodes a little bit of me, and it's just like a little needle or a pinprick, and it.
So emotions fizz in under the surface because you're not expressing.
It builds a background tension because
Yeah.
then I'm not living in accordance with my own values.
Yeah.
I'm just feeling frustrated because I feel I had something to say and I didn't, so I
Yeah.
feel unheard, and
Yeah.
that frustration builds up.
Yeah.
So that young child that couldn't communicate is still there, not wanting to be shouted at, getting more and more frustrated, and then as I move through life, as things goes up and this builds up, I then turn into the angry teenager. So another phase where the way that I hid my vulnerability was I would shout louder, I would explode, I would defend myself. If there was a bully, I'd take the bully first hand. So
Ironically, you suppressed emotion in the moment to latterly respond with emotion, not logic.
Yeah, so it's like I was like somebody shaking a bottle of pop, and it just simmers in the background, and you don't realise, and then people keep lading in you with little things that maybe aren't the biggest deal, but they're not great, and you don't say anything. Yeah. And then my inner teenager comes out that reacted with things in a different way, and it explodes out in a non-constructive way.
Yeah.
So I'll say things that may be a bit harsh or I didn't altogether mean, and that's like the teenage part of me, like the chimp brain just taking over.
But seeing that moment when, whether it was interfacing with a certain family member and he who shouts the loudest gets heard and all the rest of it, as you as in that point in time who was very vulnerable, what did you really need?
Just to be heard.
Yeah.
To be heard.
Yeah.
To be seen, to be heard, which is big.
So what we're really saying is that then sets up a behaviour of pattern that to be heard is not to be safe.
Yes.
So that dictates our behaviour patterns as we move through life.
Yeah. So I express how I really feel, I get shouted at. So that's what you tend not to do.
See, I had the reverse of that growing up, in that, I had a wonderful mother, but I grew up as just me, my mum and my brother. And my mum worked incredibly hard to support us as a family because she was a single parent. But that meant a lot of the time she wasn't there. She worked late. She worked multiple jobs. Me and my brother would get up in the morning, go to school. I was the oldest, so I had to come back and make dinner and be the responsible one. But I had nobody to talk with about my worries. My brother was younger than me, so he didn't get a lot of the worries. My primary caregiver, my mum, wasn't there in the evenings. And sometimes when she was there, she was stressed and worn out from working what I can see now was incredibly hard to give us the best upbringing she can. So sometimes you did speak up and you got shut down or berated or shouted at because what was going on with them. So I had a mixed combination of nobody to talk to or fear of talking in case you did it at the wrong time. So I grew up going, bottle up what's going on with you and don't speak your truth.
Yeah, which is exactly what happened.
Yeah.
So then then you get to that point where when you do want to be heard, what happens is you then shout because you feel you need to be heard. And you shout, so it goes full circle. So that vulnerability that you couldn't express, which kind of suppressed that growth and that ability to express myself, stayed in there, didn't change. And when I need to communicate, when it all gets too much, it explodes out and you wind up shouting like they shouted over you because you need to be heard. And then now, as I am, as a grown-up, as a in progress grown-up, I then just want peace and quiet. But then when I want the peace, I'm then feeling terrible because I've spoken to somebody in a way that doesn't really fit with my values, and I feel terrible about it. So that one thing that used to happen to me as a child has affected so many ways that I communicate. So to the point now where all these years on, I'm losing my inner peace because I'm talking, I'm feeling bad about the way I've spoken to people, or I might still be bottling things up. But that's something I've got to address in order to live in accordance with my current values, that's something I have to go back and address.
Yeah, it's not your fault what happened to you, but it's now totally your responsibility to heal, fix the parts of you that have been impacted by what's happened to you in your past. We were talking about this earlier about, I put a video up on TikTok about why does healing and moving forwards in life feel so hard, and the three parts of you that are constantly at play in your life. You know, you've got the younger you that needed comfort, safety and security and hug, and then the teenage version of you that's angry about some of the things that you've been through in your life, and the today version of you, the now version of you that's just looking for peace and serenity. But what we try to do is leave the past behind us and forget it and lead into peace. But actually we've got to get harmony between all three parts of these and give ourselves the compassion and permission. And I think that's where a lot of people get themselves a bit lost and in trouble, and it's why it feels so difficult, because in order to not be vulnerable, you have to lean into being vulnerable.
Yes.
You have to lean into discomfort. And people maybe try it once or twice, whether that's getting knocked back by asking somebody out on a date, or, you know, being knocked back from a social circle, or being rejected from a job, or whatever it may be. As soon as they get a knockback, they go, vulnerability is too dangerous and it sucks. Stuff it. I'm going to stay over here in the safe zone. But to me, vulnerability and rejection are just part of the human experience.
Of course it is. Of course it's those vulnerability, you know, not expressing your vulnerability. It's like masking or numbing. You just can't do it. Yeah. All the good things in life come when you stretch yourself. You know what your vulnerabilities are. And like I said, vulnerability is exposing yourself to a situation where you can be rejected, knocked back, you're not sure of the outcome.
Yeah.
But that's everything that you do as part of your natural progression. Like I said, like a job, anything like... I would say, with vulnerability in certain cases, pick your audience. Because I've got an example, I'm not going to say any names, but of somebody that I thought was the closest of friends. And I've sort of laid bare, told them everything, and then, you know, things that you just wouldn't normally discuss, which, as you're doing it, that naturally creates a deeper connection, and it creates your friendship and gives your friendship depth. And then something happened, and I realised that wasn't being reciprocated in the same way.
Yeah.
So then that made me want to close down to being vulnerable and exposing myself, which then makes me want to keep relationships on face level, you know, on surface level, and not deeper. But isn't that a crying shame?
It is, and I think you're right. When you make that choice of, I need to start speaking my truth a little bit more, then initially you need to start off small and safe.
Yes.
And pick your audience, because a knockback early on will really dent your confidence, and you'll lean back into your old behaviour patterns. And we can talk a bit more about that as we go through this episode. What I was really keen to talk about is, do you feel, I know certainly that I do, that when you lead a lot of your life avoiding vulnerability, you lean your ladder up the wrong kind of walls? And what I mean by that is, you build your community and your tribe in your life in the wrong environments, because it's more about protecting your peace and your vulnerability. So you end up in social circles that aren't good for you, relationships that aren't good for you, accepting things in your life that aren't good for you. So you've lent the ladder up the wrong wall, and you're climbing what you think is the right ladder. And then as you get a bit higher up and you peer over the wall, you're like, wrong wall. I need to take this ladder down and move it somewhere else. Does that kind of resonate with you?
Well, of course it does, because exactly what you've just said to me is, if you're not willing to show vulnerability, you're building a life that's basically on what you feel people perceive of you, rather than who you really are, because you don't want them to see who you really are, what your weaknesses are, what you desire, what your core values are. I mean, even exposing your core values, that's huge. We should, if we're not living in accordance with our core values, we have an underlying level of anxiety that just sits there. But yet, some people see, this is what I believe in. This is what I'm believing. And they think, well, if somebody else says, well, that's not really what I believe, they see it as a rejection, which it isn't. But that's part of your autonomy. And your autonomy, staying true to what you believe and who you are, is actually, firstly, it's one of the most desirable things that, or characteristics a person can portray, and without that, you can't really have genuine connection, because you can't know somebody at a deeper level. So that's the same as if you're trying to get to know somebody. Ask open-ended questions so there can be communication, and show vulnerability, because nobody will ever think less of you for showing vulnerability. What actually happens is people will look up to you, think that you're courageous, and see you as authentic.
I'm a great believer in that. Your people, the people that are right for you, if you show true vulnerability, they stay and they gravitate towards it. The people that aren't for you, and the right kind of people, will either berate or disappear, and you actually haven't lost anything in that moment. You've gained, because if you are in social circles, family dynamics, where you're constantly feel like you can't speak your truth and be your natural self, then you need to take a bit of a bigger look. A lot of people spend a lot of time walking on eggshells.
Yes.
Because they're afraid of speaking their truth, if you want to use that phrase. I was working with a client very recently, a guy in his 50s, and he grew up with quite shouty parents, which meant that he always felt like he was walking on eggshells. Ironically, he's now married quite a shouty woman. I'm not saying she's a bad woman in any shape or form, but whenever he would like to go and do something very simple, he overthinks asking. And the example he gave me was he wanted to go fishing in the afternoon with his friends, and he waited 4 days to pick the right time to say to his wife, Friday afternoon for 4 hours, the guys are going fishing, is it okay if I go?
Wow.
Because it wasn't that he was afraid. He didn't think she was going to say no, but he didn't want to be shouted at. And actually what happened in the moment was a little bit of passive aggression, where his partner says, well, that's up to you. You need to decide whether that's right for you or not, which actually made him feel even more comfortable. And he just wasn't able to speak his truth in that moment, to go, I've checked, we've got nothing on Friday. I was planning on going fishing with the boys for a few hours. That doesn't impact us in any kind of way. But to spend that much time to show a tiny amount of vulnerability, it's not like he was going off to Ibiza on an 1830 lads holiday for a week or something like that. He was going fishing. But he didn't appreciate that was a byproduct of his upbringing. And it was a massive, massive moment when he realised he'd married his mother. It's crazy. I can look at dynamics of friendships and people that I've brought into my life that are correlations of relationships with certain family members, unconsciously drawing these people towards you, some of which are good and some of which are not so good. And that was all about not being able to speak my truth and be vulnerable. And actually, I don't think this is something that you ever 100% get good at. It's just something you have to practice on a daily basis, of learning to speak your truth a bit more and allowing yourself to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, and also just having more self-worth or more confidence in yourself, where you can accept the fact that other people will have a difference of opinion. Not everybody has to. If you open yourself up, not everybody has to agree with everything you say. Not everybody has to align in the same way. So, if you can accept that and be happy with who you are, I think, but you'll only know that as you open up and you allow people in, or the right people in.
Yeah. You said something really interesting earlier, which was really getting in touch with your values. And I think when it comes to speaking your truth, if you struggle with sort of being vulnerable, is understanding what your values are. So I'm at a stage in my life now where one of my key values is I'm searching for peace. So whenever an opportunity or situation comes my way, I immediately go, is this going to make my life more stressful? Is it taking me further away from peace? Then I need to take a look at this. Where in the past I would have suppressed, not gone, no, that's not for me, no, I don't want to do that, or the fear of missing out. Suppressed it, went along and did it, and ended up really stressed out, unhappy, not saying things to people that I really wanted to say, feeling anxious, feeling stressed, and feeling quite depressed. And one of the things I've learned to do is whenever I'm in a situation, and by the way, I am not saying I'm an expert at this, is whenever I'm in a situation and something happens and I've got internal narrative going on inside my head, I'm not happy with this, they've done this, they're doing this, full stop, what would you really like to say in this situation? And it's actually that ability to go, look, when you did that, it made me feel like this. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it was a couple of years ago now, I was working on a project and there was one person involved in it who was fantastic, but they were constantly late to everything. And one of my values is I like to be on time for things. I just think it's respectful to the people that I've said I'm going to meet. And when I say late, 20, 30, 40 minutes, sometimes an hour, and it was consistent. And I just... it's all right, don't worry about it. But internally, it wasn't all right. It was impacting not just me, but other people and what they were thinking. And I was bottling it up. And one day I just said, I need to say something. And I said, I need to say something. When you turn up late like that, it makes me feel like that you don't respect me. You don't respect all the other people that are involved in this. And I don't like the way it's making me feel. It's making me stressed. And I wanted to make you aware. And then I put the full stop in, and then part of me, my inner child part, went, uh-oh, here comes the attack or the shout. And that person paused for a moment and reflected and went, you know what? You're right, it's been really inconsiderate, and I'm sorry about that, and I didn't mean to make you feel like that. That's something I need to work on. Mm-hmm. Now, in that moment, my vulnerability muscle got a bit of a flex going, it's safe to speak your truth. Now, they could have given me, you're being unreasonable, you don't understand what's going on with me, and it could have turned into what I deemed to have been a bit of an attack. But that doesn't mean that I still shouldn't speak my truth.
No, absolutely agreed.
So I decided to do that at that point, in that situation. It was having an impact, it was a business thing, and I could feel vibes that it was going somewhere. And it was going to have a deeper impact. But I think for people listening to this episode is starting to find small ways where you can step into your vulnerability, because that is the path towards freedom.
Yes.
And it is by starting small, like you said earlier. It's not, I don't like the phrase pick your battles, but pick where you start. Mm-hmm. If your relationship dynamic with your partner is not particularly healthy, that may not be the area to start. Yeah, it may be with a colleague or a brother or sister or something like that, or even somebody that's provided a service for you. You've taken your car for a service and they've taken much longer than it should have done, or there's been a problem. Just been able to speak up and go, I'm really not happy the way that this gone. It's made me feel like I've bought my car to the wrong place, because you've got no personal investment in the dynamic of that relationship. Find an area in your life where you can go, I'm going to allow myself to feel uncomfortable and speak my truth in this moment. I think my point is, when you start to speak your truth and you show your vulnerability, I don't think you should point the finger of blame at the person and point out their action, do kind of blame. Yeah. I think it helps to sort of say, when you do that, it makes me feel like. So like you were talking earlier in life, where people would shout if you tried to speak. That ability to say, when you shout, it makes me feel like you don't care, or you don't want to listen to me, or my opinion is not worthy.
Yeah. So yeah, that's right. It's acknowledging what you feel, because you can't move on from anything until you acknowledge it. You can't put it, just hide it away, brush it under the carpet, and think that it's dealt with. You have to acknowledge it
Yeah.
and do something about it.
It's a lot of work to stay in this space of vulnerability. It creates a lot of unnecessary stress in your life, and it fuels anxiety and depression, and you're actually keeping your life very small. It isn't safety, it's isolation. It is, the freedom is on the other side of vulnerability, because you will attract the right people and the right opportunities into your life. And we're not just sitting here saying, by the way, just be vulnerable, because it's not easy. It is not easy, but it's also not easy living inside of vulnerability.
No, I agree. But what you started off saying then is absolutely true. Vulnerability is actually the key to happiness, personal growth, and moving forward in every way of your life. As much as it can keep your world small,
Yeah.
by learning to master vulnerability, it opens up everything as well.
Yeah.
It's a sea of opportunity. It's something for you. All the time, I'm not too sure about that. Well, go and find out. Ask the question, fill in the form, book the flight,
Yeah.
and that's where all the great things happen. So
The thing is, dealing with vulnerability can be interesting as well. I can remember during COVID, in the height of the restrictions, where we were all wearing masks and only so many people were allowed in the supermarket and all that kind of thing, and we had the social distancing in space. I can remember being in the supermarket down the road from here, and I bumped into somebody I know in the queue. And we were wearing face masks at the time, and they were behind me, and it was like, there was small talk going on while we were waiting to pay for the shopping. And I said to the person, "How are you anyway?" Half expecting the standard response of, yeah, I'm all right, just getting on with it. And they went, "I'm not actually that good. I'm really struggling at the moment. I'm finding this incredibly difficult." And part of me went, "Oh, that's not the response I was expecting," and also in this supermarket situation as well. But that person in that moment decided to speak their truth and make themselves extremely vulnerable. And sometimes it can catch the person off guard.
but the reality is, the person that you're talking, there's a good chance that they're feeling the same way too.
100%.
And this is the thing, we all share a lot of commonality in our vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
So that's part of the reason that we connect and communicate. And it's actually, not only are you giving that other person an opportunity to be vulnerable, speak the truth, it's also something that resonates with you, and it gives you an opportunity.
100%. I mean, I was in that situation, I said, do you know what? I think most of us are feeling the same at the moment. It's a strange situation that we find ourselves in. I didn't try and fix the situation.
No.
Sometimes if someone is being vulnerable to you, which can make you feel vulnerable as well and uncomfortable, you don't always have to fix the situation for the person. Just allow them space to speak and be heard.
Well, look, that's it. The fact that somebody's just spoken, that's already movement. That's already, it can be a big thing.
Yeah, I referred earlier in the episode that if you don't deal with your emotions, at some point they're going to deal with you. As you know, a couple of years ago I went through something and I suppressed for a long, I was really struggling at a deeper level. And I can remember the same supermarket we're talking about COVID, where the guy spoke to me in the queue. I was in there and I got hit sideways by all the emotions that I wasn't dealing with. And I was in the middle of the supermarket putting my basket down, and I could feel the tears starting to come out, and I had to put my basket down, run out the supermarket to the car, kind of broke down in the car, and I'm like, I need to speak to somebody. And that's where I reached out to certain friends and said, I'm struggling. And that, what I'm kind of saying is, there is a points in life where we can talk about being vulnerable, but we still struggle to be vulnerable. And you should never allow it to get to that point where you're like, it's that bad now that my vulnerability and my bottled up emotions are going to force me into dealing with it. The reality is I could have spoken up much earlier and not got to that crisis point. And everything that we talk about on this podcast really does lead into your mental health and well-being. We've talked in depth about prevention of life and suicide and depression, and it's to keep the needle so far away from that, not allowing things to get to crisis point. But vulnerability is one of these traits that ties into all of this, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That ability to speak up. And it's not easy. Even me, with the training, the experience and years of working with clients, I struggled and I didn't get it right. But I can look back now at everything that I did wrong, and it's if I take the lesson.
Yeah. Well, we're only. This is what we keep saying. We're only
Yeah.
human.
Yeah.
Now, I definitely don't get it right.
Yeah.
The one benefit to the training and the different skills that we've learned is I can understand what I've done, and I kind of know what rabbit hole to go down to see where it's stemming from.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time we're having conversations, and all of a sudden it goes ping. You
Yeah.
know, it resonates back to something that's happened to me earlier, but you are only human, and
Yeah.
this is something, it's a lifelong pursuit, vulnerability. It's a huge subject, it's the core of everything I
It is. And I think vulnerability is a superpower. It's not a weakness.
Yes, definitely.
It is. It's something to sort of, the big S
Yeah.
on your T-shirt. By the way, that doesn't mean you walk in the pub every Friday and go, lads, my life's a complete wreck. And you're the atmosphere hoover that sucks the life out of the situation. But it is being able to speak the truth, going, yeah, I'm not feeling great at the moment, or I'm struggling with this, or I've got some stuff going on in my life and I don't even know how to put into words what I'm going through. And for the person that's there with you in that space to not try and fix it, just go, I can understand you're going through some stuff at the moment. It must be difficult.
Yeah. I was going to say, we were talking about going into the pub and speaking to people.
Yeah.
Even if it's at face value, most people, I mean, don't go into depths. Don't tell people your greatest fears and that one really bad thing that you did and you were. Don't do it. But in terms of being vulnerable, just don't worry about speaking to people. Most people, if you show vulnerability, will always have something kind to say. I mean, it might not be the most constructive or whatever, but if you need to say it, say it, because it's very, very rarely met with negativity.
Yes.
So that's better than bottling it up.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's part of the skill is learning that you're starting to shut down and actually asking yourself, what would I really like to say, but I'm not saying because I'm afraid of sounding stupid or weak or that I might get laughed at. Learning to speak your truth in that moment, but also as people, we also need to learn to get better at allowing people to be vulnerable in front of us and not get uncomfortable with that, not feeling like we need to step into superpower and fix it.
Not try and fix it, not sit there and wait to respond.
Yeah.
Actually listen.
Yeah, I think one of the great things you can say to people in these moments is, what do you need right now? Somebody to listen? Are you looking for solutions? Or do you just want to go and do something so you can get out of your head for a bit? Yeah, a lot of the time, some people just need somebody to listen.
Absolutely. And then sometimes, because we feel we need to respond, sometimes it's better if, like you said, we do just like all the response that they need is for you to listen.
Yeah.
Certainly not say, it's all all right, don't worry, don't matter, mate.
Yeah.
Because that kind of, somebody's opened up to you, they've exposed their vulnerability, and then you just close them down at that grass level
Yeah.
of opening up. That
But-
sort of grassroots level of opening up, then you sort of dispel what they say.
A lot
But
of-
again, that's
yeah.
about finding your audience.
It is. And the other thing is as well, that thing that you're shutting down and not wanting to say, you've probably been sat with that thing in your head for days or weeks. And sometimes when you just verbalise it, when you speak it out, we do this all the time with each other. I've got this going on at the moment, and neither of us will say anything back. We'll just listen. As soon as you said it, you just feel better.
Yeah.
It's out of my head now. It's like, get it out.
Definitely.
Speak it. No, it's not one of us turning around going, right, what you need to do is you need to go and do this and tell them that. And it's not about that. It's just like, yeah, that feels better now. It's like, it's on the outside.
Yeah, it's like somebody taking the lid off that shaken up bottle of pop.
Yeah.
Just letting the gas out.
Yeah, I think when it comes to vulnerability, you need to start small, but you need to be consistent. So a kind of takeaway from this episode is, if you feel yourself shutting down, ask yourself what it is you really need to say and pick a moment or space or people that you're going to start doing it with. But you must do the compound effect. It's no good doing this like once a month. You need to be consistent and sort of do that neuroplasticity work of learning to create a new habit around it. One of the best things you can do is go and get some therapy if you're struggling with your attachment style that's leading you into this, or if you can't afford therapy. There are so many good books out there about attachment style, and podcasts, and videos and stuff. Learn about who you are, because when you understand why you are the way you are, you can start to do something about it.
Do you think people don't know what their vulnerabilities are? It's all a bit confused.
I think people tend to go, this is just the way that I am. This is just who I am. And it's, there's that phrase, isn't there? You don't know what you don't know. In therapy, in Peace of Mind Birmingham and Peace of Mind here in Glasgow, one of the things that we invest a lot of time in is understanding our client more than they understand themselves.
Yes.
And it's not for us to tell them, but when we understand them, we'll put a torch on and say, if you looked over there in the dark, because here's the clues why you are the way that you are. Yeah. Because you can't fix what you can't see.
Yeah. So we're saying if you've got things in the background, you can't quite figure them out, all you can come up with is, this is who I am.
Yeah.
You think it's important to talk to somebody just to help figure out what they are.
Educate yourself, learn about it, and then change it. The way I see it is, we've talked on this episode about certain things that happened to us in our childhood that conditioned our responses and our ability to be vulnerable. We were very young. Our belief systems were being formed, and the way I say it's like software being installed to us.
Yeah.
So we've had a software patch going, in these situations, we run this operating system, and that's how we respond. And that's installed at, say, at the age of 7, 8, 9, 10. And that same software is still running when you're 20, 30, 40, 50, doing the same responses when it's no longer child parent, it's adult, and we're regressing back to type. So our inner child takes us back to, I'm that 7-year-old again, as I'm interfacing with my business partner, my wife, my partner, my brother, my sister. So I think what we've got to do is look at these parts of us. And it's a learnt behaviour, which means that it can be unlearnt and reprogrammed and changed, but you don't know what you don't know. You can't fix what you don't know is broken, if that kind of makes sense. Yep. So curiosity about yourself and why you do these things is the path to freedom. But most people don't take that path because it's uncomfortable. It involves them looking at parts of themselves and parts of their history that cause discomfort.
Yeah.
So we'll invest so much energy and effort and going, let's not go there. Let's just... But there's other areas of your life, right now, that you're not living to the full because you won't look here.
Yes.
Does that sort of make sense?
It makes perfect sense.
Nearly everyone that ends up in therapy at Peace of Mind, we go backwards to go forwards. The anchors, the stuff, that bag of stuff that you're carrying around with you, that other people have filled up with stuff and it's not even yours to carry anymore. Yeah. It gets heavy in adult life, and maybe it's time to kind of put it down. And, so lean into your truth. Notice if you're starting to shut down. Pick your audience. Start off small, but be consistent with it. And if you need to, have a look at your attachment style, the things that you've been through that have formed your belief systems. And that is a path to freedom, because I absolutely promise you, life becomes so much more fun, so much more interesting, and the sense of freedom you get when you can step into vulnerability is absolutely fantastic. That was a great chat.
Yep.
I enjoyed that. Again, if you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple, please click the subscribe follow button, or if you're following us on YouTube watching us, please click that bell icon, because it helps us bring you more episodes like this. Once again, from myself and Ian and Barney, thanks very much for watching.
If you or someone close to you needs to access mental health support, please contact your GP. Or, if it's out with normal office hours, get in touch with NHS 24 on 111. Alternatively, contact the Samaritans on 116 123. All calls are free of charge from any phone. You can also find more support information on the Tickety Boo website, ticketyboopodcast.co.uk.